Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard. I'm Lauren Feldman. I'm here with Gene Marks to talk about the stories and issues we think business owners should be following this week. Welcome, Gene.
Hello, Lauren. How are you?
I'm great. I missed you last week, but I know it was for a good cause. You were off doing something important. Remind me again, what was it?
I was in Bonita Springs last Friday, Florida, speaking to the Florida Cremation and Funeral Association.
Oh, that's right. How could I forget? How'd that go?
I killed.
I knew you would. Did you get a sense for what's happening in that industry? How are they doing? What were their concerns?
It's a touchy subject because thanks to COVID, it's definitely been a growth industry.
They're doing well.
They are doing fine. And if you're in Florida, where, which is, as you know, is God's waiting room, there's funeral directors and the people running cremation companies. They've been doing just fine. They've been suffering with the same type of supply chain and inflation issues. My talk to them for an hour was about finding people.
Oh, interesting. I was wondering about that because I figured it probably wasn't CRMs because they probably don't have a lot of repeat business.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's not a marketing thing for them. I mean, they have branding issues. I mean, they want to keep their name out there so people think of them, but you don't do direct marketing if you're a funeral home. But no, finding people is their biggest issue, and it's not all just mortuary schools. I mean, it's bringing them on, and then of course, what are the hot benefits and what are the where can they go to find people, and what potential things could be coming from the labor department and from the government that might be increasing their compensation, all of that kind of stuff that we talked about it. But I got to tell you something. There was people were dying to watch me there. Dying. I got 1 million of these checks.
All right. On that note, let's actually talk about some of these business stories that we promised our listeners. Let's start with the poll you wrote about, which you obviously got a laugh out, and I got a laugh out of reading your piece. It gave a pretty bleak outlook for small businesses, perhaps too bleak. Tell us about it.
For God's sake, yeah. This was a piece that I published in The Hill on this past Thursday, and it was it came after, Lauren, you must be the same way. You cover small businesses, so you get lots of people sending you surveys and research reports and whatnot, right?
Yep.
And I myself, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I like to lean towards research report that's based on actual data. Like when it comes to payroll information, unemployment or whatever. I want to hear from ADP and Paychecks because they mine their data of their customers and say, here's what we're seeing. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And, I learned some of this working at the New York Times, where they're very strict about poll results and survey results that they will publish. They want to know for sure that it's a scientifically reasonable survey or poll. And a lot of what gets sent to them gets rejected. I don't have the skills to figure that out quite as well, but I try to be careful.
Yeah. I mean, the rule of thumb is, again, if it's data we're talking about and not a survey, I mean, if it actually came from a company, if Microsoft releases a research report based on security breaches in their cloud users, that to me is like data, what I mean, from their actual, from their systems. And which leads me to this survey. It was sponsored by a company called Alignable, who, by the way, they're a very good platform. They're a small business networking platform. But people release these surveys. They try to get attention for their companies and clickbait. So Alignable's survey, their press release, was that based on this quote-unquote survey that they did, 47% of small businesses were at risk of going out of business by the fall. That's literally what 47% of small businesses. And they hired a survey firm who surveyed like 4,000 small businesses and asked them about their revenues and their profits and the struggles that they're having or whatnot. And they came to this conclusion that there's 30 million small businesses in this country, 15 million, according to them, are going to go out of business by the fall. Like, what the fuck is that? And then on top of that, when you look at like what businesses have gone out of business, like during the Great Recession, which was a great recession, I mean, not so great, but a big recession.
I know what you mean.
People estimate that 1.8 million businesses went out of business. Not even 15 million, like Alignable is warning us in what is not such a bad recession. I mean, we're in a bit of a slowdown now, and of course we're having struggles. And then you're like, well, there's inflation issues. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, there's inflation issues for since Cleopatra. And when I went back to data, some New York Times reports from the 70s, where like there were tens of thousands of businesses that went out of business during the 70s because of the hard times then, not millions like this study said. So I just had to write something saying, listen, when you see these studies, man, like take them with a grain of salt. When you see these companies trying to get attention for themselves by catching your eyeballs by saying stupid things like half of the small businesses in this country are going to go at risk of going out of business. I mean, you got to call into question that company's judgment, whoever approved that press release to go out.
A couple of things struck me reading that. One is, it's just further proof of something you and I both know, which is that the coverage of small privately owned business is not what it should be. There's a lot of bad information out there, and it's not like it's rocket science, but a lot of journalists move on quickly to another beat, and people just don't figure out what they're talking about before they move on, and that's how something like this can get through and get published. The other problem is, I think, it's amazing, but we still don't really know how to define a small business.
Right.
Who knows what they were referring to when they said small businesses? The SBA says anything with, I think, fewer than 500 employees is a small business. Other places refer to a small business and a mom and pop as, essentially the same thing. Obviously, there's a big difference between a mom and pop and a 500 employee business. We should figure this out.
Yeah, I agree. And I also just don't, your point about the journalists is very true. I mean, small business is an area that it gets a lot of coverage when the news is really bad, when we have, pandemics and recessions and all that, the media likes them. But for the most part, it's not covered that deeply. And they usually put junior reporters.
It's not the marquee beat. It's not where everybody wants to be.
Yeah.
People go there to pay their dues and when they want to move on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so then, and I could just see like a kid out of college, looking at a survey like that and writing about it like, oh my goodness, this company says that, half of small businesses are going to go out of business. And you and I have been, we've been covering small business for years. You look at that numbers and you're like, this is such baloney. So.
All right, let's move on. The Department of Labor is working on rules. We've talked about this issue so many times, but the Department of Labor is working on new rules. You wrote about this, defining an employee versus a contractor. Is this something we need to be concerned about?
Yeah, well, we've talked about the issue before in the past because it's been bandied about for so long, but it's really starting to progress. Earlier this year, Secretary Marty Walsh, who's is the Secretary of Labor, ex-mayor of Boston, ex-president of a large union in the Boston area, his labor department announced their intentions to change the definitions of worker classifications. And then they just held two big online forums about this in June, and have announced now by a blog on their site that they're now going to start moving forward with redoing these rules. And I expect to see something by the end of the year. And I don't think a lot of small businesses are aware of this, but it could have a dramatic impact on a lot of businesses around the country.
As a rule of thumb, I generally try not to pay too much attention to new rules that are in the works, because you just never know. Sometimes they happen, sometimes they don't. You have a sense this is really going to happen, though.
Yeah, I do. And you're right about, I try not to pay attention like you. I mean, even when people have like bills that are proposed in Congress, I'm like, all right, well, we'll talk about it when it really becomes close to reality. This, though, is close to reality. I mean, this is not just rules that they're talking about changing. These are rules that they're now working on to change, and but there's going to be a lot of lawsuits about it. I mean, Lauren, what it is right now there's a bunch of different criteria for classifying whether a worker is an independent contractor or an employee. And, these new rules are going to use something what's called the ABC test. And without going into too much detail about it, there's one part of it, the B part, which is the biggest issue for business owners like me, by the way. It really impacts me because this part says that if a small business or any size business hires somebody and that person is generating revenue for their business, then that person could, very probable has to be classified as an employee, not as an independent contractor. So as we've talked about my firm, like we sell CRM systems and I frequently hire outside developers to do customizations for a specific project. And I may pay them $50 an hour and then charge my clients $100 an hour. And they're 1099s. But under these new rules, I may be required to classify them as employees of mine, which means I have to withhold payroll taxes and potentially make them eligible for my benefit plans, health insurance or retirement. And that's a big issue. I was speaking just a couple weeks ago to an association in Miami that does, they're a courier association, messenger services and packages and couriers that compete against the FedExes of the world. And these guys are freaking out because they're drivers of their vans and their trucks and whatnot. They're like all independent contractors. That's how they prefer to do it.
But that does raise an interesting question. I mean, what's the definition of generating revenue? Does somebody who delivers a package generate revenue?
It's a very, very good question, and there's core language about being core to your business, the stuff that independent contractor is doing. So it is whether or not somebody is if they're just doing marketing services for you or they're financial services, that's one thing. But if what they're doing is the services that they're providing are core to the services you're providing to your customers, then that means that contractor could very well have to be an employee. And in this case, there's truck drivers or the courier drivers. Their services are core. They're delivering packages to the customers of these delivery companies. And their costs are being built into the revenue being generated, the fees that they charge their customers. And because of that, it's going to be a real debate as to whether or not they should be classified as employees. And most people in the industry think that they will be. And that's going to be a significant, potential regulatory and cost thing for a lot of these businesses. So I'm just warning, when I'm speaking to the funeral directors, by the way, same thing. I mean, a lot of the people that drive the hearses, a lot of people that they bring in to do services on the actual cemeteries and lawns or whatever. Some of the funeral directors, they hire, contractors to come in to help and run their funeral services, because they're trying to keep costs down. Some of those people might have to be classified as employees, based on these rules. So we have to keep a real close eye on this. It is coming in the next couple of months.
Interesting. But although, even if it makes it through, you did mention the specter of litigation.
Oh, yeah.
That could delay it and, push it down the road.
There's no question that there will be lots and lots of litigation around it. A lot of people are accusing the Biden administration of they want more employees, so it makes it easier for employees to unionize. Obviously there's a big labor push, behind this. So there will be lots of, I can guarantee the NFIB and, the other business groups like them will immediately start filing lawsuits against this.
All right, here's another story based on a survey. You reported, last week, that 1 in 4 small businesses have replaced their CRM systems this year. That seems like a remarkably large number to me, 1 in 4.
It really is. This was a piece that I wrote in Forbes. It was a research report that was done that showed that these small businesses are basically not happy with their CRMs. They're just replacing them.
And you made a really interesting point about that there might be a reason they're not happy with those systems.
Yeah, usually when I find people aren't happy with CRMs, it's because they're doing a really bad job at using their CRMs, there used to be a time when we sold a product called Goldmine software, which is still available. And it's like this on-premise CRM. We still sell it, but it's not very popular anymore because it's not cloud-based. But it used to have a really interesting feature, Lauren. I would get called out to some client or some company that's using Goldmine. By the way, this was like 150 years ago. And they'd be like, we hate this software so much and we want to replace it and we want to know, what other options are. Goldmine has this little feature. You can go behind the scenes and look at key clicks by user. And I would bring up all of the users in their system and be like, yeah, well, I don't understand how you hate this system. Most of your people have like 14 key clicks. Like you're clearly not using this. You know what I mean? So, and I guess I have to say that to anybody with a CRM system that you have, honestly, if you've got a mainstream CRM that's out there, and there's plenty of them that we all know the names, the Zohos and the Salesforces and the Insightly's and Nimbles, and you're quote unquote not happy with your CRM, before you start, turning your company upside down and disrupting your world.
It's not an easy process to switch CRMs, which is why it's so stunning that 1 out of 4 might have done it this year.
I know. And I think that some of these people might have been duped by salespeople into changing their CRMs, or others just, it's a political thing. Like, the new sales manager takes over and, only liked Salesforce in the past. So I'm going to have Salesforce here. But before you turn your company upside down by replacing your CRM system, I would invest, a few bucks and, get a consultant in there to really look at what you're doing with your existing CRM. And I am going to bet you that with a little bit of training and a little bit of reconfiguration and a lot less money than replacing it, you could probably get your existing CRM system working the way you really want. I'm not going to say that's all the time, but I'm going to bet 80 to 90% of the time, these people don't have to be replacing their CRMs. They need to be focused more on using them better.
Should these CRMs just be easier to use? Is that the basic problem?
No, because I get that a lot where people say like, hey, is this CRM user friendly? And, what do you think of this CRM? Is it user friendly? And there's no such thing as user friendly. See, it's in the beauty in the eye of the beholder, I mean, I can look at a wall, you and I at a wall, and I can say it's blue and you'll be like, well, it's navy blue. I mean, nobody can really agree. So it's really just a matter of the users being trained the right way, and the owners of the company, or at least the person that's leading the team, needs to basically say, shut the hell up. This is the CRM system we're using. So I'll give you the training that you need, but I don't want to hear anything more about it. Just use it the way we should be using it. I'm telling you, this is different than it was 15 years ago. Most CRMs that are out there, they have all the features and functionality any small or medium-sized company needs. And if you're really unhappy with your CRM, I'm going to bet it's more your fault than the CRM's fault. I know that sounds like tough medicine to take, but I think that's what it is.
I think that probably hits home with a lot of people. I've talked to people who've been very much aware that they have not put the time and energy into mastering the system that they should.
Right.
And for obvious reasons. I mean, it's not easy. It takes a commitment. So one last story. And this is, as you often do, you pick up on things that I have no idea are going on. This one is about retirement plans and something that I didn't know existed called a pooled 401k plan, which I gather from your story didn't used to be available to smaller businesses, but it now is.
Yeah, it's called a PEP, Pooled Employer Plan, and it's because of the Secure Act of 2019. So it's relatively new. It's 3 years old now. But here's why it's important. If you're listening to this conversation and you've got a 401k plan in your business, I bet that you've got some costs involved with it. A lot of times, depending on the size of the 401k plan, you have to get an audit done or a review from an outside accounting firm. You have regulatory paperwork that has to be filed, the Form 5500, some forms with the Department of Labor, both state and federal. So it's a cost to have that, plus you're paying a fee for an investment manager to be overall in charge of your 401k plan. Well, these PEPs change it all. So you want to talk to either your administrator or you want to talk to a larger company that administers 401k plans. A lot of the payroll firms are doing this, the ADPs and the Paychecks and the PayScales and Paycors of the world. What they're doing is they're taking advantage of what's called these pooled employer plans, which means that that, you can take your 401k and throw it into a pool with a bunch of other businesses' 401ks. So you're all one big happy account. Before, you only could do this if you were related to these businesses, but now, because of the Secure Act, you can be in the same pool with any number of businesses. It's administered by one person, the administrator, and although there's a little bit less flexibility, number one, you absolve yourself of your fiduciary duties because you've got the administrator who takes responsibility of that now for all of the plans. So that's good. So if there's any issues fiduciary wise, you've got less liability. But more importantly, say you've got a pooled plan and there's 100 companies that are participating. Well, those 100 companies before all needed to get their own separate audits. Now there's only one audit that's needed of the plan. And then that one audit's cost is split by the 100 companies that are in that pool, which basically means you would be paying a lot less in those kinds of fees. The same thing with administrative and filing fees as well. So not a lot of business owners know this, but you should absolutely talk to your 401k administrator and ask them about pooled employer plans. And if not, they don't offer them, you should be talking to a larger organization, Principal, any of these, large financial institutions that offer 401k plans, because they've got PEPs set up, which can save you a lot of money in administration.
It seems kind of like a no-brainer. Is there some kind of drawback? Why wouldn't everybody do this?
It's a bit of a brainer, and the reason why is because, first of all, if you got a very small plan, maybe your administrative costs aren't so much that it's worth the effort. But bear in mind though that there's a transition. You've got to take it out of the assets in your existing plan and put it into new assets in a new plan, which might mean there's new names and faces and new investment options. So sometimes employees get a little nervous, like, what the hell are you doing with my retirement savings? So you've got to make sure you've got good education involved to do that. And then it's just a time period to transition it over. I spoke to a few people I interviewed for this piece. I did it in the Philly Inquirer, and they all said it took them about 3 to 4 months as a transition period to not only educate and, everybody's got to sign off on it, your employees, because it's their retirement savings, but then also then do the actual transition. So it's not something you just snap your fingers and it happens overnight. But I certainly think it's worth the effort long term. One woman I spoke to, they were paying 10, 12 grand a year for an audit of their 401k plan because it was required. They had 100 employees. And now she says their overall fees are $1 grand a year. So it's huge.
Interesting. It sounds like maybe it is a no-brainer for somebody that doesn't have an existing plan and is just starting from scratch.
Yes, also true. If you're going to start, from scratch with a 401k, and if you don't have a 401k, for God's sake, you got to have a 401k. I mean, they're inexpensive to set up, and the more your employees put away, the more you can put away as well. That's a no-brainer. So if you're going to start one, definitely start one as a pooled employer plan.
All right, Gene, anything you're working on this week that we should be looking for?
I haven't decided what I'm going to write about next week for the Inquirer. I've got a few things up in the air. So more on that when we speak the following week. But thank goodness my editor from The Guardian, who I love, he's been on vacation for 3 weeks. Can you imagine? That's what happened.
I noticed you hadn't appeared there. It's because your editor was away?
Yeah, my editor's on vacation, so I guess we're all on vacation.
They don't have backup?
Apparently not. So, I've been off for 3 weeks. I can't wait. I'm itchy to get back in writing for him. He'll be back in action next week. And Entrepreneur, I have a recent piece coming out, unless it's already been out, about being careful about stating what your revenues are for your business. That's actually coming out soon.
Ooh, don't tell anybody that. As a journalist, I need people to talk about their revenues.
Yeah, we're going to talk about revenues for your business because people say their revenues in 2022 is a certain number. And I got to tell you something, with inflation, we shouldn't be looking at dollars in 2022. Anyway, we can talk about that when that piece comes out.
You're making me nervous. I don't know if I want to talk about that. Gene Marks is a CPA who writes weekly on small business for The Guardian, The Hill, The Philadelphia Inquirer, The Washington Times, Forbes, and Entrepreneur. You can also hear him on ABC Radio's Eye on the World with John Batchelor. Gene hosts 2 small business podcasts with Paychex Corporation and The Hartford. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you, Lauren. We'll see you next week.
Talk to you soon.